Hello friends. Yeah. Today I wanted to share with you direct tax laws and international taxation subject. Right. Already in 3 videos I covered some chapters. So in each chapter, what we can learn like that I mentioned. Now remaining chapters I wanted to complete. Right. So here the chapter name is Transfer Pricing and Other Provisions to Check Avoidance of Tax. Transfer Pricing and Other Provisions to Check Avoidance of Tax. So from the chapter, what you can learn. So you can appreciate the need for incorporation of transfer pricing provisions in the Income Tax Act. You can comprehend the meaning and significance of arm's length principle and the practical difficulties in application of arm's length principle. You can appreciate the meaning and significance of terms associated enterprises, international transaction, and specified domestic transaction. Right. Next, you can determine the arm's length price by using different methods prescribed under the income tax law. You can appreciate the meaning of safe harbor and safe harbor rules for safe harbor incorporated in the income tax law. You can appreciate the benefits of entering into advanced pricing agreements. You can identify the cases where secondary adjustments have to be made. You can pinpoint the responsibilities of a person entering into an international transaction and to keep and maintain prescribed information documents. You can identify the circumstances when an assessing officer can invoke the power to determine the arm's length price. Right? Next, you can comprehend and appreciate the country by country reporting requirements and related matters incorporated in the income tax law in compliance with BEPS Action Plan 13. You can appreciate the specific anti-avoidance measures incorporated in the Income Tax Act in respect of transactions with persons located in notified jurisdictional areas. Next, you can appreciate the provisions incorporated in the Income Tax Act restricting interest deduction claimed by an entity in respect of borrowings from an associated enterprise in line with BEPS Action Plan 4. Okay, these are all the things you can learn from the chapter of transfer pricing and other provisions to check evidence of tax. Right. Next, another chapter. What is the chapter? Non-resident taxation. From this non-resident taxation, you can determine the residential status of foreign companies applying the place of effective management guidelines. That is first. That is one. Next, you can examine the scope of income taxable in the hands of non-residents. Next, you can examine when income arising in the hands of non-resident from a transaction is deemed to accrue or arise in India. Next, you can appreciate the circumstances when the presence of eligible fund manager in India would not constitute business connection in India for an eligible investment fund. You can identify whether a particular income is exempt in the hands of non-resident based on the provisions of Income Tax Act 1961. You can compute the profits and gains from shipping business, from business of operation of aircraft, business of civil construction in certain turnkey power projects in the case of non-corporate, non-residents and foreign company applying the presumptive tax provisions under the Income Tax Act. Next, you can determine the quantum of head office expenditure allowable as deduction in the case of non-residents. You can determine the tax payable by the non-residents on dividend, royalty and fees for technical services applying the special provisions of Chapter 12. You can determine the tax payable by non-residents applying the special provisions related to certain incomes of non-residents prescribed under Chapter 12A. Next, you can examine the withholding tax provisions to determine the tax, if any, required to be deducted at source on certain payments made to non-resident. You can compute the total income of non-residents and tax payable thereon applying the general provisions and special provisions applicable to non-residents under the Income Tax Act. So this is from the chapter of non-resident taxation. Next, double taxation relief. From the chapter of double taxation relief, you can appreciate the need for double taxation relief. You can appreciate the types of double taxation relief available. You can comprehend, apply the provisions related to double taxation relief contained in the Income Tax Act and income tax rules in problem solving and addressing related issues. You can comprehend the procedure for claiming deduction where there is no double taxation avoidance agreement between the India and other country where the income has been taxed and compute the amount of deduction. You can appreciate the concept of permanent establishment under double taxation avoidance agreements and its relevance, right? So this is from the chapter of double taxation relief. Next, from the chapter of advance rulings. You can comprehend the meaning and scope of term advance ruling and the need for obtaining advance ruling. You can appreciate the constitution of authority for advance ruling. You can understand the constitution of board for advance rulings. You can appreciate the procedure for making an application to the authority for advance rulings or for board for advance rulings and the procedure to be followed by the authority or board on receipt of application. You can appreciate the restricted binding nature of an advance ruling. You can know the circumstances when an advance ruling can be declared void. This is from the chapter of advance rulings. Next, from the chapter of equalization levy, you can appreciate the issues in taking e-commerce transactions. You can comprehend the OECD recommendations for taking e-commerce transactions under action plan 1 of base erosion and profit shifting project. You can appreciate the need for equalization levy. You can comprehend and apply the provisions of equalization levy contained in Chapter 8 of Finance Act 2016 and the relevant rules in problem solving and addressing related issues. This is from the chapter of equalization levy. Done. Next, from the chapter of application and interpretation of tax treaties. Here, you can identify the connecting factors of double taxation. You can appreciate the meaning and need for tax treaties. You can appreciate the basic principles of interpretation of tax treaties. You can identify the extrinsic aids to interpretation of tax treaty. You can appreciate the importance of commentaries in interpretation of tax treaties. You can appreciate the role of Vienna Convention in application and interpretation of tax treaties. So, from the chapter of application and interpretation of tax treaties, you can identify the connecting factors of double taxation. You can appreciate the meaning and need for tax treaties. You can appreciate the basic principles of interpretation of tax treaties. You can identify the extrinsic aids of interpretation of tax treaty. You can appreciate the importance of commentaries in interpretation of tax treaties. You can appreciate the role of Vienna Convention in application and interpretation of tax treaties. Right. Next, fundamentals of BEPS. After studying this chapter, you would be able to gain a broad understanding of concept of base erosion and profit shifting. You can appreciate the significance of action plans of BEPS. You can comprehend, appreciate the provisions incorporated in Indian tax laws in line with different action plans of BEPS. Right. Next, from the chapter of overview of model tax conventions. From the chapter of overview of model tax conventions, you can appreciate the need for model tax convention. You can appreciate the key features of OECD and UN model tax conventions. You can identify the subject of various articles of OECD and UN model tax conventions. You can appreciate the broad similarities and differences between the principles enshrined in certain articles of OECD model tax convention, vis-a-vis the corresponding articles of UN model tax convention, right? So I think it is useful you. Okay, thank you.